Welcome to Digital Thangka Workshop. Today we're just finishing off the very last thing with our Drawing a Lotus series. We're looking at bringing our finished image into our original image, which we used as a reference. And the idea is here that we just, as an exercise, we're going to look at seeing if we could restore this Thangka. So let's say the lotus was completely damaged and someone had given us the job to restore it. We're halfway through that process. We're just about ready to start integrating our lotus into the picture. We've gone ahead and we've matched the colours that the original artist used. We've pretty much duplicated the original artist's shading structure. And so we've got a lot going for us already, but there was still a lot of work to do. So if I add our work, you'll see where we're at. So there's our lotus. It's a big difference. Add the shading, highlight islands, and then there's our line. So if we were just to concentrate on this area, we're a long way from replicating the original look and feel of the Thangka. But it's not too much work to bring those into a stylistic unity, and that's what this tutorial is going to be about. So straight up, I think the first thing we'll do is we'll get our line sorted. So obviously our line is wrong. This Thangka is, if we take a look at what's below, the lotus is outlined in gold. And it also has this very dark outline, which we're not actually going to attempt to reproduce. We're just going to pretend that there's a complete gold outline. And we'll try and copy that. So let's try and reproduce that gold. First thing to do is to adjust the colour. So Command U, Hue and Saturation. Colorize. Okay, so that's kind of close. Then, as I showed in the previous tutorial, we're just going to add a basic pattern overlay. And it's come up as default because that's what I'd used last time. So here are my settings. I've got it set to overlay. I've got the, whatever this is, burlap or something, I think that is. Texture selected. I've scaled it to 85%, which is how coarse the texture is. So that's important. And then we've added some nice variation there by doing that. Now by adding that overlay blend mode, our lightness value has come up. So we need to now go back and adjust that. So we'll go back to Hue and Saturation. Our hue is pretty good, so we'll just bring it down until we get to that, which is pretty close, I reckon. Maybe come up a bit. Okay, so that's our line almost done. The only other thing to do is, I mean, this is partially a problem with the way this is reproduced. I scanned this out of a book, and in order for it to get into a book, someone had to take a picture of the original Thangka, and that was probably, it's an old book, so it was probably done with a slide, for example, and then it was reproduced in the book, it was printed, I photographed it, I brought it into the computer, so it's been through probably about 4 or 5 different iterations in its life, and each time it goes through some kind of digital process, it gets degraded in some way. So you can see it's out of focus here, it's blurry. These areas that should be sharp aren't sharp. I've sharpened it as much as I could using the Photoshop sharpen tools. So that's just what we're dealing with in this picture. If you actually had an actual restoration job, then the photograph would be, you would hope, would be good, or as good as you can get a photograph. So what I'll do, just to try and stylistically match that, is we need to blur our line. So I'll just come up here into Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and that's done nothing. And the reason that's done nothing is because I've got the pixels locked, so we need to make sure that comes off. And we just for the point sake of this exercise, we're just trying to approximate a blur which is similar to that which exists in our image. So I've got 1 pixel there, that's kind of about right, I think. 1.4 pixels. That's pretty good. Yeah, so that's softened everything way down. Okay, so straight away we're looking pretty good. In the previous tutorial we looked at textures, so I'm not going to go over that again. So I'm just going to add the texture that we brought in from our previous tutorial, which is up here. And I'll just turn that on and off for you. The texture's subtle, but it makes a world of difference. And that texture I've got affecting the original image as well, so it creates this beautiful unity between the two sections. It really ties them together. So we're looking pretty good now. The last thing I'll do to tie these two together in terms of texture is to add a little bit more variation in our areas of colour. So if we compare this area here to this area here, we can see there's a lot of brush stroke variation here which we're not picking up in our shading or our rendering. So I'll show you something new. What I thought I'd do is I'd find, in order to produce a texture that's going to replicate the original Thangka's brushwork or rendering, you know, we could go to many sources. There's things called grunge maps, which you may be aware of. You just Google grunge map and you'll come up with all sorts of images that you can use to create texture. But I thought for us something that would be fun is we'd use an actual Thangka to base our texture on that. So what I found is Himalayan Art Resources just recently uploaded this image here. This is, I believe, His Holiness the 7th Dalai Lama. And in this area, halo around the head, there's this beautiful texture and brushwork. I thought we could base our texture on that. So, whenever you're creating a texture, the step one is always to make sure you've got as big an area to work with as possible. So at the moment we've got His Holiness's head here, and this is one example where we don't want to see that. So we have to be very respectful when we're doing something like this. We're going to clone out this area. So then we have this, we'll have a very large area which we can sample from. So there's a few ways you can do that. What we might do is, before we start cloning into this area, we'll clean up our existing texture. So the problem we have here is we have these little patches where the paint is worn off and the canvas is starting to show through. When you're doing a texture, you don't want to have areas like that, generally. You want to avoid having sort of, what we're trying to get is the brush stroke, not age or wear. So we're going to try and liven that up a bit. So what I'm going to do is, the easiest thing to do is probably just use what's called the spot healing brush tool. You know, in the old days we only had the clone tool, but nowadays we have the healing tool, which is generally used for photography, but here it works a treat. And so I'll just go through and I'll just restore some of those areas. So if we go Command Z, you can see what that's doing. It does a really good job. Come in here. Well, just have to be careful what this goes up against. So as you're painting towards the edge of something, it'll tend to pick up the edge. Okay, so that's great. So I'll clone out the Khatvanga and we'll clone out His Holiness as well. Let's see what happens if we try to do it with the healing tool. Not too bad. Okay, so it's not wanting to work there. It's definitely not going to work with His Holiness. We'll give it a go and see what it does. Yeah. Make sure you've got the lasso tool selected. And you just create a feathered selection, and the feather you create is going to be determined by the resolution of what you're trying to achieve. So you just have to experiment with that. I'll go for 10, see what that does. So you draw around what you're trying to clone out. Then you move the selection. And holding down the command key, that will clone that area. And we want command and shift, command and alt. We want to copy, not cut. If I had have gone command H to hide the selection, then we'll go again. And then you can see clearly what you're doing there. You can position that just right. Okay, that's really good. Then we'll do the same thing again. Okay, that's pretty good. What we've got is this pattern replication here. So we need to avoid that if possible. So what we might do is we'll just go back to the clone tool, and we'll just do a little bit of work to break up that replication there. Oops. Okay, that's worked. And then we might take out, there's a little faint line here as well, we might take that out too. Okay, that's not too bad. Now what we'll do is we'll bring this into our existing image. We use the lasso tool. And that's going to be what we're going to sample from. So holding down the command and then the alt key, we'll copy. If we drag that off, that'll bring it into our existing document. It's got that feathered edge, which we're not worried about. And there is our texture reference. So I'll turn a few things off to make it clear what's happening here. Okay. We're going to use this to texture whatever's below it. So in the previous tutorial we said that's generally done by selecting soft light blend mode. And then we just need to desaturate all the colours, so it's only selecting the tonal values, not the colour values. So bring the saturation down. And believe it or not, this is almost exactly mid-tone. That was a mid-tone red. So we don't have to adjust the lightness. It's already perfectly suited. So it's not lightening the image, it's not darkening it. You need to have it so it doesn't create any lightening or darkening effects. If you have it lightening or darkening the image, you just chase your tail for the rest of the Thangka, particularly when you go to printing. The closer you can get it, the better. So that's an amazing coincidence that was exactly on mid-tone. just using the arrow keys there just to adjust it. And zero is perfect, so that's quite amazing. Let's zoom in, and we can see how that is now affecting the color values there beautifully. So it's creating a beautiful variation which would be consistent with a hand painted image. Before we do anything, what I might do is I'll just turn that back up into normal, and what I'll do is, because this is creating texture, it's a little bit fuzzy at the moment. I want that to be a little bit sharper than that. Again, it's photographed out of focus, and again it's a JPEG, so just dragged off the web, so the quality is poor. So I'll just sharpen it a little bit, and that should just crispen up our texture a little bit. So we could go to Smart Sharpen, it's probably as easy as anything. And yep, that's enough. Okay, so I think I've gone a little bit far with that. What I'll do is I'll just redo that. Okay, so I've halved approximately the value, so that's pretty good. Okay, back to soft light. Now what we can do is, just with our colour layer selected, we can see how that's affecting our colour layer. So if I slide it around underneath, you can see. Being round, what I'm going to do is we'll just do a little trick. I'll just drag it off here, and what I'll do, I'll take the clone tool again, I'll make a nice big brush. Okay, so with the clone tool selected, what we're going to do is we're just going to stamp this texture onto our lotus. We want current layer here, and we don't want aligned. So what aligned means is that it'll follow the brush. What we want is for it to return to that point sample each time we take our finger off. So I'll make it a little bit larger. Let's take a look at that. That's pretty much it. So we're just stamping that texture in there. If you can see, this texture is coming off the edge of our what we actually want to affect here. So if we were to leave that how it was, it would be affecting our the image that we're trying to restore. So what we'll do is we'll hold down Command and click on our color layer. That'll select everything that's in the color layer, which is what we want. Then up here at layer 16 is our texture. We'll just add a mask to that, and that will remove everything that's outside. It's now made it transparent. So if I zoom in, you can see the texture's only now affecting our color layer. So let's stack some things on top of that. Let's add our shadow, a highlight island, a line and our texture. And so what we've just done there is, I'll just turn that on and off. So it's just adding that little bit of variation. Now if we take a look at our underlying image, then we're getting even more unity between those two images. We're getting some really nice conformity. So our restoration project's going pretty good. Okay, last thing I'm going to do is we need to do some erasing here, because the deity obviously needs to be sitting on the lotus, but at the moment the lotus is in front of everything, and also these the lotus leaves and the lotus buds come on top of the lotus in some areas. So I'm going to have to erase this. There's a couple of ways you can do it, but I think the easiest way to do it is just to erase the sections we don't want. So we've got multiple lines here, and what we want to avoid is having to erase multiple things. So one of the things you can do with the newer versions of Photoshop is, if we hold down the Command key, we'll select all the layers that we want to erase. We can make that into a group, and so now it's in a little folder, and we can turn them all on and all off in one go. To erase all of those, we just need to add a mask, and that mask affects everything that's in the group that's below it. So now, for example, if I want to have the deity sitting on the surface, then you just treat it like any other mask. We just erase. Then you add back the bits that you want. So it's no more complex than that. What I'll do is I'll start doing that. It's going to take me, I don't know, maybe 20 minutes to do that. So I'll just do another sped up version, and then we'll have pretty much finished this tutorial. Great, so there's our finished restoration. That's a pretty good job, I think, considering the quality of the image that we were working against. Let's zoom in. We'll just take a quick look at all our different layers and how they affect things, and that will be it. So again, comparing the section that we've been looking at all along, we now have a good unity between that section. All our blurring is similar. I'm not sure if you noticed, but I blurred the mask that I was creating here, so I didn't have any hard, I hadn't erased up to a hard edge. So everything's soft, equally soft. We've got our line layer, which we did in a fake false gold. We've got our highlight islands, if you remember from last week. We've got our highlight layer. We've got our shadow layer. We've got our colour layer. And there's our background image. So there you can see the mask that I've created. So that's the erasing that I did to enable the background image to show through. If we look at looking at the colours that we ended up with based on our shading, we're still a little bit light compared to the original artist. So the original artist, you can see, has gone very dark here with the blue and with the green. We didn't quite achieve that. So if we were wanting to be more, a little bit more consistent with the original picture, we could go Command U, and we could just bring down the overall lightness of that. And that'll make it a little bit, yeah, so that's a lot closer to our original. Okay, so there we are. If I go tab, that'll give us a full screen, and you'll be able to see our complete image. So I think that's a pretty good job. I'm not sure, I haven't seen anyone do digital restoration of Thangkas. I've done it, I think I started doing it about 5 or 6 years ago. I had to restore a Thangka for the Sangha I was working in at the time, and it was a really fun project, and it's not hard to do. So if there's anyone out there that, maybe you could learn this technique and you might be able to get some work. If someone had a very valuable Thangka that was heavily damaged in one area, you can do non-destructive restoration and then print on canvas, rebrocade it, and that person could potentially have a brand new restored Thangka without having to touch their original, which you'd pretty much, I don't know, it'd be a hard decision to do that, because the Thangkas have such a blessing that if it's been a Thangka that's used for practice, then the inner offering has been offered to that Thangka many, many times, and that's why they have so many what appear to be watermarks on them, water stains. So it's sat in someone's meditation room, and someone's done a lot of deep practice with that Thangka. So it's hard to, it'd be a big decision to decide to start painting on top of that Thangka. But here with digital, you can do a restoration which is non-destructive and this gets close to the original. Okay, so I think this is the last, I've been saying that for a while, I think this is the last tutorial in the Painting a Lotus series. Again, I hope you enjoy it, or you have enjoyed it. I'm not sure what we'll do next. I'm happy for, on Facebook or on YouTube, if someone jots down a suggestion, I'm happy to cover any topics that you might want covered. Maybe the next thing we'll do is we might keep working with our lotus. We'll add a deity to the top, or we could add a seed syllable, or we could work with a mantra. Lots of different things we can do. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed it, and happy painting.